Okay, do that again.
Okay. So the telescope is very well balanced.
So this is 6 tons right here.
This is 6 tons.
And a 1-ton counterbalance.
Right, a 1-ton counterweight.
All right.
But we have to move the telescope by hand, so it needs to be well balanced. So it's actually very easy to move by hand.
Wow. So you just aim it.
Really strong.
Okay, now how did they aim it? They just aimed it completely by hand?
Completely by hand. At that point, they did have the system of right ascension. In order to narrow down what you're looking at in the eyepiece, they have a series of smaller spotting telescopes that they would use. The only one that's original that's on it right now is this 12-inch telescope right here. So this is an original eyepiece on this telescope on the side. So, and then at one point there was a 4-inch telescope back here, and there was a 6-inch telescope right here, and they floated the dome on top of it on pontoons.
So that it would freeze.
It wouldn't freeze.
It wouldn't freeze.
Salt water,
Oh, so you had pontoons.
Right.
Got it.
The dome was on pontoons.
Got it.
And then they could move it around really easily.
Wow.
I know, really cool, and much even down, and also move all the way around the dome. So, and that chair is from his kitchen, so that's life on Mars until the day he died in 1916.
And what convinced him the day that he died? Oh, no, okay, I see, I'm sorry.
Right,
I thought, okay, never mind. I was not being cute, I was just being totally naive.
Yeah, mansion, and it was just right here. I believe this house was built partially on the foundation of the baronial mansion.
Baronial mansion.
Yes, it
Wow.
started out as a 4-room cabin, and then the size of the planets relative to that is indicated in the upper left-hand corner of each sign.
All right, so there's the sun. Keep pointing. That is Mercury?
That's Mercury.
Okay, back out again. So you have
this
scale.
is the relative sizes of the planets.
Okay, and there's Venus.
Right, as far as the distances of how they're placed on a scale that is 1 inch equals 1 million miles.
Okay, so as we walk up this hill, each inch that we walk is 1 million miles away from the sun.
Exactly, yes.
Okay.
So on that scale, the sun is not this big. 2 different scales represented here.
Okay.
The sun is not 24 million miles in diameter. It would be less than an inch big if
Okay,
it was
so we
on
got
that.
2 scales in terms of the size and another
And
scale
the
in terms of the
distance.
distance.
Right,
Got it.
exactly.
Got it.
And then there's also a 3rd scale that goes along. Really impressive as the Clark telescope.
Yeah.
But it has a really cool story.
Okay, shoot.
So, by the beginning of the 18th century, mathematicians and astronomers could mathematically predict the orbits of the planets around the sun. And this is when there were only 7 planets that we knew about, only up to Uranus. So they had calculated the orbits of Saturn and Uranus, and then when they observed them, there was a slight difference. They weren't going exactly where they thought they should. So someone said, maybe there's another planet, right? And its gravitational force is pulling on Saturn and Uranus and causing this discrepancy. So in 1846, a fellow in Germany scope and this smaller spotting scope, and they have eyepieces, so you can look through them. But the main telescope doesn't have an eyepiece, it has a plate. And that's because it's actually a camera. So they would put a piece of photographic glass in here, open the shutter, and then they could do a 1 to 2 hour exposure of a section of the night sky. So
Now, did they move in order to compensate for the Earth's rotation?
They did, yes. They used a clock drive, and that's right here in that box. And I'll get to that in a minute too.
Okay, sorry.
No, that's okay. So what they were doing was they would, they thought they knew where this planet was going to be. They calculated it, and plus all the planets are basically in the same plane, right? So they would take a photograph of a section of the night sky.
Except for Pluto. Never mind. I'm sorry.
But
I'm sorry.
at the time, all the known planets were in the same plane, right? So they knew where they should be looking approximately. So they would take a photograph of a section of the night sky, and then they would come back a week later and take a photograph of the exact same spot. Because all the stars and things that are really far away from us, they're not going to change position in a week's time because they're so far away. But if there's a planet in our solar system in that photograph, we'll be able to detect its movement against the background stars, right?
Yep.
Okay, so
Interesting.
really interesting. So they needed someone to do this work for them. They have the telescope, they got everything all set up, but nobody wanted to do it. It's really hard work, really tedious.
Tedious. Uh-huh.
Extremely tedious. So they found this young man named Clyde Tombaugh. Clyde Tombaugh was a 24-year-old Kansas farm boy with a high school education and a homemade telescope. And he had done some observations of Jupiter and Saturn with his telescope and made some drawings of what he saw and sent them to Lowell Observatory for their criticism. And they were really impressed with this work. So they said, you know, why don't you come out? You can use our telescopes. So he saved up his fall harvest money, took the first train that he possibly could, and then as soon as he got here, he decided he did not want to go back to Kansas. So they offered him a job. And at first he was shoveling snow off of the domes and doing maintenance and giving afternoon tours. And then they got him started working on this project. So like I said, it's really tedious. So to take one photograph takes a 1 to 2 hour exposure. And like you so aptly observed, it's not like you could just set up the telescope and then go inside, get a cup of coffee, and come back an hour and a half later, right? Because the Earth's rotating. If the telescope doesn't compensate for the Earth's rotation, then the pictures would be streaks. So it has a clock drive, and it's in there, and it's just basically a clock with gears on it that will move the telescope automatically with the Earth's rotation. But for one thing, the dome doesn't have a clock drive, so you have to be in here to move the dome periodically. And also, the clock drive isn't exact. It's not a computer. It doesn't know what it's looking at, right? So the entire time that you're taking the photograph, you have to be in the dome, the entire time the shutter's open. You have to be looking through this eyepiece and making little tiny adjustments as necessary, because even if it gets off a tiny bit, then your plate is ruined. You have streaks. So poor Clyde was out here for an hour and a half taking one photograph. Telescope domes are never heated.
Why?
It needs to be the same temperature inside the dome as outside the dome. If it's warm inside and cold outside, then you'd have heat waves going up in front of the lens, and that would distort the image. So it gets really cold in Flagstaff at night.
Now, where are we going with this? Keep going.
So, poor Clyde had to sit out here for an hour and a half for one picture. He's going to take as many pictures as he can throughout the evening. Of course, he's doing it at night, right? And then once you take the photographs, you have to process the plates, and then you have to compare them. And each plate is, 12 by 17, 13 by 17, or something like that. So, each plate contains thousands of stars, each picture. And you have to literally use a microscope to compare tiny sections of each plate.
So you would overlap them and...
No, he used this device called a blink comparator, and I'll show it to you in a minute, and you can kind of see how it works.
Okay.
You kind of have to get it. I could explain it, but you need a visual, I think. But so Clyde was at it for 9 months. He took hundreds of photographs, and he compared them all. Finally, on January 23rd and 29th of 1930, he took the photographs that contained Pluto. It wasn't until about 2 weeks later that he actually processed the plates and found the planet, and then on March 13th of 1930, Lowell Observatory announced the discovery of our 9th planet. Then they needed to name the planet. Naming it was a really big deal, right? So they didn't name it after Walt Disney's dog. Just to get that out there, just was not named after the dog at all. They wanted to name it after Percival Lowell in some way because he had initiated the search for the planet.
Yeah.
But Percy and Percival Lowell, these are all really bad names for a planet. Percival Lowell's widow suggested that they name it Constance. And that was her name. They said no to that also. They also wanted to name it after a Roman god or goddess because all the rest of the planets are named after Roman gods and goddesses. Cronus and Minerva, and there were all sorts of suggestions. Finally, they received a suggestion from an 11-year-old girl in England. Her name was Venetia Burney, and she'd been studying the Roman gods and goddesses in school. And she told her teacher they should name it Pluto. So she telegraphed over her suggestion, and that's what they chose, was Pluto. So Pluto's the Roman god of the underworld. Kind of fits with the same Roman god and goddess program that they had going on. And then the first two letters of Pluto are a P and an L, and that's Percival Lowell's initials. So I thought that was a pretty cool tribute to him without actually calling it Percival or naming it after his widow or something like that. And they made the symbol for Pluto on charts a P with an L over it. It's the only one that's in English. The rest of the planets are all Roman symbols. So we don't use the telescope really for anything anymore. It's in great shape and it could still be used technically, but with modern technology, if you want to take a picture of the night sky, you don't have to sit in a cold dome for an hour and a half. So we just don't use it anymore.
So you're sitting at a computer display.
Right, and you don't even have to go in the dome.
Yeah.
And it moves automatically, and they even have programs that will analyze the pictures and look for something moving automatically.
Well, what use are these when you've got the Hubble?
Well, I mean, the Hubble Space Telescope, its mirrors are designed for deep space imaging. I mean, it can take some really cool pictures of Mars and things that are closer up, but it's designed to look at things that are far away.
So using it for Mars is sort of overkill.
Yeah, kind of. I mean, we do have some great images of Mars from the Hubble, which is great. But a lot of what it's used for is stuff that's far out. And it was used to find those new moons on Pluto, right? So it can look at things that are really far out. You know, so there used to be stacks of books in the middle, and I'll turn this light on up here. So, like I said, this is the Rotunda, and it was built in 1915, designed to be a library. It was used as a library for many years. For a while, it was our visitor center, and then when the new visitor center was built, then we turned it into a museum. So there's a few things that I'll point out in here. This is Percival Lowell's 6-inch Clark telescope, an extremely fine instrument in and of itself. This is the telescope that Percival Lowell used when he traveled to Japan in 1892. If you can kind of imagine that logistical nightmare.
Yeah.
The whole thing weighs like 250 pounds in its cases.
But at least he didn't have to get it through security.
Yeah. And then this is the 23rd and 20th. And each of these arms is a little microscope, and they're both looking at the same section of the sky on each plate, the same part of each plate. So what Clyde would do is he would look through here, and he would turn this knob back and forth on the top, and it makes a little mirror inside flip back and forth. So first you're looking at one plate, and then the next. If there's no planet in there, if it's just the stars, then as it flips back and forth, when you look at it, everything will be in the same spot. You won't even be able to tell that.
So it's like animation. If you see animation, then you know you found something.
Yeah, exactly. That's a really good way of explaining it. So Pluto's in here. So when it's over here, it's next to one dot, and over here, it's next to other. There's a little arrow pointing at Pluto, and I can turn it on, and it'll blink back and forth automatically. So you can
can I look through there?
You can.